dreamt up over 100 years ago, her lists of firsts and eerie aesthetic have garnered her a place at the pinnacle of science fiction characters. She was the first robot to appear in film, the first android femme fatale, and her look not only served as the basis for one of the key players in the Star Wars saga, but has been copied endlessly in fashion and by musicians out to make a statement ever since. She was, of course, the robot from Fritz Lang's 1927 science fiction classic Metropolis, a universally recognizable symbol of her kind. Yet for all of her greatness, we cannot even agree upon her name. Is she Aurora? Is she Robot Maria? Or Evil Maria? Or False Maria? Or do we just settle on Maschinen-Mensch, as is given to us in the original German version of the film? But what do we really know about her origins? In making this video, I set out to discover just that, to answer the question, why her? What inspired her creators? And how did she get her iconic look? So, join me now as I rewind back to the inception of Metropolis and discover the dark origins of its iconic star. How do you solve a problem like Maria? In order to understand the origins of the robot Maria, you'll obviously need to be aware of how she fits into Metropolis. As such, I thought about adding a brief synopsis of the film at this point, but after putting together roughly a 5-minute explanation, I realized that it was all a bit unnecessary. It is, quite simply, a love story, set in the future, with a robot whose role is to act as the catalyst for the destruction of the city. Aficionados of Metropolis will probably be contemplating sending me hate mail right now for presenting it with such simplicity. But let me answer with this. At the time of the film's original release, the science fiction god H.G. Wells, writer of War of the Worlds and the Time Machine, scribed a review for the New York Times, calling it, and I quote, quite the silliest film. The point is, the storyline of Metropolis tries a bit too hard. It wanted to be political. It wanted to be philosophical. Its special effects are spectacular and without question groundbreaking, while its budget, the largest ever for a German film at that time, meant that too many people had too much of a say in it. As such, its director Fritz Lang loathed it. I have a sneaking suspicion that he hated the robot as well. He never spoke about it in interviews, and it was literally burnt at the stake for one of the last scenes of the film, thus depriving any future historians of any record, apart from the film itself and some notes from its creator, of its existence. Perhaps I'm writing too much into his pyrotechnics. The robot being flambéed, like a witch, was an idea dreamt up by Thea von Harbu, the wife of the film's director, Fritz Lang, who is credited as having written the screenplay and a book that served as the template for the film, and which at times differs significantly from it. Take, for example, the scene in the book when John Friedeson, the ruler of Metropolis, is introduced to the robot. The being was indubitably a woman. In the soft garment which it wore stood a body, like the body of a young birch tree, swaying on feet set fast together. But although it was a woman, it was not human. The body seemed as though made of crystal, through which the bones shone silver. Cold streamed from the glazed skin, which did not contain a drop of blood. The being held its beautiful hands pressed against its breast, which was motionless, with a gesture of determination, almost of defiance. But the being had no face. The beautiful curve of the neck bore a lump of carelessly shaped mass. The skull was bald. Nose, lips, temples merely traced. Eyes, as though painted on closed lids, stared unseeingly with an expression of calm madness at the man who did not breathe. This description, I would argue, has more in common with that of the funerary mask of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun than it does with the robot Maria that we see in the film. And this is exactly, I would argue, what sculptor and Fritz Lang filmic collaborator Walter Schultz-Mittendorf had been told to use as the basis for the robot's looks. Tutankhamun was, after all, a huge sensation at the time, his tomb having been discovered at most only a year before work started on Metropolis. So somewhere between Thea von Harbu's description and Walter Schultz-Mittendorf's creation, we have the semblance of Robot Maria. But this doesn't explain the soul of the creature. or grant her motivation for actions that take place in the film. Keep in mind that she was burnt at the stake as a witch by the end of the film, so something clearly went downhill fast. This is where we look into the origins of why we have the first robot in film appearing not in Hollywood, but in Germany. I've just met a girl named Maria. Not only is Maria the first robot to appear in film, she's also the original robot femme fatale. Just think about how many have followed in the nearly 100 years that have passed since she beguiled men, as both film and TV have endlessly circled around the idea of the alluring android vixen, the television series of Westworld, or the reimagined Battlestar Galactica, and in film, Ex Machina, Star Trek the Motion Picture, Galaxina, and arguably the ultimate androids, Pris and Rachel from Blade Runner, another film which I discussed the origins of in my previous video. She enjoys killing men for pleasure, and this is made clear in her Whore of Babylon performance in Metropolis. But why? I will go as far as to say that Robot Maria perhaps embodies all of our fears of technology running rampant. This is something which, with today's never-ending talk of the evils of AI, is arguably as relevant as ever. But in post-World War I Germany, after having for the first time in history experienced machines killing so many, the fear was also very tangible. Then you have the character of the screenplay's writer, Thea von Harbu. She was no shrinking violet, but rather a strong woman of aristocratic upbringing and with strong opinions, who surely relished the idea of controlling men with her superior intellect. So she saw every reason to imbue her creation with similar traits. This was, after all, the 1920s and the dawn of feminism. This was also quite a change from what had come before. If you look at earlier science fiction musings about robots, you'll undoubtedly find yourself being directed to an 1886 novel by the French writer Auguste Villiers de l'Isle Adam. In it, we see the character Lord Ewald bemoaning to his friend, a fictionalized Thomas Edison, that his fiancée, Miss Alicia Clary, although being physically perfect, is emotionally and intellectually empty. Edison offers his friend a solution to his dilemma. He will create for him an android version of Alicia, in a Stepford Wives type fashion, without any of her bothersome personality. Yes, the misogyny meter is running pretty high so far, but wait. Edison introduces Ewald to his previous experiment, an android called Hadley. Hadley was created in the image of a certain Miss Evelyn, a woman who beguiled a friend of his with her looks and destroyed him. Edison sought out Miss Evelyn only to discover that she was not as she appeared. Rather, she was horribly ugly, and her beauty was entirely the work of cosmetics, wigs, and other accessories. Lesson learned, Edison returned to his studio and created Hadley, in an effort to overcome the flaws and artificiality of real women, and create a perfect and natural woman who could bring a man true happiness. I don't think there's a misogyny meter in the world that wouldn't be overloaded by this story. Nevertheless, here we find, at least in part, the origins, or perhaps counter-origins, of Robot Maria. But Maria isn't one-dimensional. She's not a prop device or a plaything, but rather a fully formed character. And that's where things get really interesting. Not long before von Harbu sat down to write the treatment that would become the book and then the screenplay for Metropolis, a play premiered in Prague, which introduced the world to the concept of the machine worker, or slave, aka the robot. RUR, or Rossum's Universal Robots by Karl Čapek, which he himself describes as being a comedy of science about what happens when the product of the human brain escapes the control of human hands. There are both male robots and female robotesses in the play, and although neither Fritz Lang or Thea von Harbu ever acknowledged a connection of Metropolis to RUR, either by coincidence or intent, their idea for Maria becoming an out-of-control monster shares some similarity there. RUR wasn't the first attempt by a writer to take on the topic of what happens when humans play at being God, however. That credit arguably goes to Mary Shelley's inspirational 1818 science fiction classic, Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
I beg your pardon?
My name. It's pronounced Frankenstein.
Or the modern Prometheus. And there's an even earlier attempt to warn us of the risks we take when striving for scientific knowledge, and Mary Shelley points her readers directly at it in the title for her novel. That is the Greek myth of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and was subsequently punished for his deed by them. What Aurora, Frankenstein and Metropolis all share in common is that they were all conceived at a time of great technological upheaval. Frankenstein coming at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and Aurora, along with Metropolis, coming after the First World War, when machines first took to the skies in anger, and machines on tracks crashed through trenches. It comes as no surprise, then, to hear that in our present time of great technological advances, Hollywood is again returning to the theme of the robot femme fatale, with a serialized version of Blade Runner planned, a new version of Battlestar Galactica on the horizon, and there's even in development a television series based on Metropolis. Ave Maria. Another facet of the film, which uses Robot Maria as a catalyst, is when it deals with the topic of mysticism. Be it Judeo-Christian biblical references or Eastern esotericism, you'll hear few commentators talk about Metropolis's dark religious undertones, and in watching it, you'll barely notice that they're there. Take, for example, our first sight of Robot Maria, which is in mad scientist Rob Wang's studio when she's first introduced to Friedrichsen. This scene is not only one of the most chilling in science fiction cinema, full stop, but it also exudes a sense of unease. You're so focused on the robot, however, that you'll hardly notice the pentagram on the wall behind her. Sure, it's the sign of Satan, but before you get on the phone to the occult police, take it all with a pinch of salt and listen to the wisdom of Sam Winchester in the pilot episode of the television series Supernatural, in which Amy, the girlfriend of the boy killed by the woman in white, wears a pentagram pendant. She tells Sam and Dean Winchester,
"Troy gave it to me. Mostly to scare my parents."
To which Sam replies,
Actually, it means just the opposite. A pentagram is protection against evil. Really powerful. I mean, if you believe in that kind of thing.
Although the use of this symbol is never explained in the film, in the book version of Metropolis, we learn that the house in which Rob Wang's studio is located was built before Metropolis by a magician who protected it with the Seal of Solomon. Now, the seal historically has not only been a 6-pointed hexagram, but also a 5-pointed pentagram. Why Lang and von Harbu chose the pentagram over the hexagram, we don't know. But if I wanted to psychologically mess with you, as the audience, then this is how I would do it. Play on our Christian aversion to the symbolism that a pentagram represents. The point is that when von Harbu wrote the book, she focused so much more on the mysticism, a topic that she was very fond of. She wanted Metropolis to be a story about our hearts, our soul, and the contrast that she created between the real Maria and the robot Maria was one of the juxtapositions that she used to convey that. This is why we see Robot Maria representing the whore of Babylon, in contrast to the real Maria, who we first set sight on, surrounded by children in the eternal garden, glowing with the radiance of the Madonna, whom von Harbu references in the novel when she describes Maria's Madonna voice. To this, you can also add the knowledge that the name Maria is simply the Latin version of the name Mary. So, if you weren't slapped in the face when watching Metropolis for the first time, then let me satisfy your need to be slapped now with the words robot bad, human good, robot spawn of devil, human child of God. Are we clear now in our understanding? Maria, you've got to see her. Having constructed something of a loose mosaic of how Robot Maria found her soul, let's now turn our attention to how she found her form. I'm attaching a label to this section, marking it as being wildly speculative, as no record exists of the development of the Maschinen-Mensch. And what I say here is based largely on discussions that I've had with Bettina, the daughter of the sculptor Walter Schulz-Mittendorf, and Scott Maple of Crop Circle Inc., who worked with Bettina Schulz-Mittendorf back in 2014 in an exercise to recreate the first accurate reproduction and only example of a fully working, wearable Maschinen-Mensch, just as it was in the film. So let's start with the smoking guns. I'm going to do a Poirot here and point my finger directly at who I believe to be the initial perpetrator. Jacques Oskar Schlemmer and your Triadicious Ballet. The idea for the Triadicious Ballet has its roots in Stuttgart, not long before the onset of World War I. Schlemmer saw the modern world driven by two main currents, the mechanized man as machine with the body as a mechanism, and the primordial impulses representing the depths of creative urges. The ballet toured Germany after its premiere in 1922, and the ballet helped to spread the ethos of the Bauhaus, a Berlin school of art and design which rose to prominence during the Weimar Republic, only to be shut down in the 1930s by the Nazis. Now, the year 1922 is pretty significant in the development of Metropolis. It's roughly the time when von Harbu started work on the script. This is also the year when Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered. The final piece in the puzzle also appears at this time, and that is the creatively entitled fashion sculpture A by German expressionist artist Rudolf Belling. Belling created this fashion mannequin for a company called Ermansdorfer Bustenfabrik in 1921, and it continued to be used in shop displays until at least 1924. Now, I had already been circling Belling as a possible candidate because of other work that he had created, such as Organische Formen from 1921, and the fact that in talking about the robot's origins, Walter Schulz-Mittendorf had said, "Problems with the form? No, expressionism is alive." However, in conversation with Scott Maple, he had pointed out a curious inclusion in the only other version of the Maschinen-Mensch ever known to be made by Walter, a full-size sculpture not designed to be worn, which was made as a display for the Cinematic Francaise in 1972. The key phrase there is "not designed to be worn," and so as the basis for this sculpture, Walter used a mannequin to build the form around. And guess which mannequin that was? That's right, Fashion Sculpture A by German expressionist artist Rudolf Belling. I would therefore postulate that if, as the artist, you wanted to recreate a previous work that you had dreamt up, that you would seek out the same materials that you had used before, ergo Fashion Sculpture A. All of these smoking guns are, of course, additions to that which I have already mentioned, the desire by von Harbu and Lang to have their robot look like the funerary mask of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, the logic being that the mask is metal made flesh, and that as the sarcophagus does in whole, it cocoons the body of the individual inside. My Maria. Throughout my years, I have to be honest and say that my memories of Metropolis have tended to focus on Robot Maria, and how she looked and how she continued to be made use of in popular culture ever since her creation. I never really thought about what she represented, a pivotal turning point in our civilization, when machines were first contemplated as having the ability to become one with us. There was nothing like Robot Maria before Metropolis, and when AI reaches the level of artificial general intelligence, or the point at which it's smarter than us, I wonder what it will then make of her. Will it think that we created a monster, a Frankenstein, to scare our children with? Or will it believe that we were simply throwing about the idea of the Maschinen-Mensch and envisaging where it might go? Did we all therefore miss the underlying message of Metropolis, misdirected by the grandiose philosophical and/or political ponderings of von Harbu and Lang? I think now, more than ever, it's time to revisit the film, the book, and bring the Robot Maria back to life. I just want to give a big thank you to Scott Maple at Crop Circle for his help in researching this video and for bringing Robot Maria back to life. I've added a link in the description to his website, and if you'd like to see his creation, the Science Museum in London has it, but do get in touch with them before visiting, as it isn't generally on display. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you enjoy what I'm producing here. It really helps.